Today, we're going to a narrow stretch of water with an outsized grip of the global economy. And we're stepping into a moment when warships, not tankers, are deciding what moves and what doesn't. Oil prices are pushing back above $100 a barrel. And on Monday, after the US Navy announced a blockade on Iranian traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, effectively restricting ships from going in and out of Iranian ports. In response, Iran has threatened neighboring ports in the Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman, signaling that if its exports are choked, it's willing to spread the pain. European allies, including the US, have decided to join the blockade, and experts warn that the standoff could go far beyond oil, exacerbating supply chain disruptions, including fertilizer shortages that may push global food prices higher. So, what just happened in Hormuz? The US Navy has moved to blockade Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical choke points, where a significant share of the planet's seaborne oil flows through a channel just a few dozen miles wide. The announcement came Sunday after peace talks with Pakistan between US and Iranian representatives, alongside regional intermediaries, failed to produce any agreement. Under this blockade, traffic specifically to and from Iranian ports will be restricted. Non Iranian vessels are supposed to be able to transit under much higher monitoring and risk. Iran's own tankers and cargo vessels are facing severe constraints on what they can and export and import by sea. Oil markets reacted instantly. Brent crude, the global benchmark, moved back by about $100 a barrel, reflecting both the immediate loss and some Iranian barrels and risk that the confrontation could even possibly escalate. So, when a navy becomes a valve on the world's most used energy system, as you listen, keep this in mind. What does it mean when a military decision, not a market decision, starts acting like a valve that opens and closes the flow of energy to the rest of the world? Officials in Tehran have responded to threatening ports and energy infrastructures in neighboring countries around the Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman, places that host exports, terminals, refineries, and key logistic hubs for oil, gas, and other commodities. The message is blunt. If Iran can't move its own goods freely, it can make it harder and dangerous for others to do as well. That could look like missile and drone strikes on ports and tanker facilities. Threats or harassment of tankers heading to rival producers, and cyber attacks aimed at port operations or maritime logistics. In other words, the blockade doesn't just constrain Iranian traffic, it invites broader conquest of who can safely use the region's ports and sea lanes abroad. Is this an energy crisis or a logistics crisis? Because if ports are threatened, even countries not under blockade can be severely affected. One striking point of the story: a major European ally, including the UK, have declined to participate in the blockade. There are a few reasons that likely factor into this. Number one, escalation risk. Joining a blockade is a symbolic step. It's an act that edges closer to direct conflict. European governments may fear being drawn into a wider war in the Gulf. Number two, energy exposure. Europe is still dealing with the fallout from the reduced energy supplies. Jumping into another confrontation could destabilize Middle Eastern flows as a serious risk for economies that have already lived through energy shocks. And number three, diplomatic positioning. Some European states say that they want to preserve channels to Iran as possible mediators, and join a US led blockade would make that much harder. So, while the US is putting its navy directly on the line, Europe is signaling caution that both members' military and strategic military market psychology. Oil at $100 and food on your table. If nitrogen fertilizers are headlining, but the knock-on effects reach much further than your gas tanks. One of the big concerns experts are raising is fertilizer. Modern agriculture is deeply tied to the energy system. Nitrogen fertilizers rely heavily on natural gas as feedback. Phosphate and potash chains depend on global shipping and energy intensive processing. Transporting grain, livestock feed, and finishing food products on all consumes fuel. If a blockade or counter threat disrupts the shipping in and out of the Gulf, not just for oil, but for inputs like ammonia, urea, and other fertilizers components, farmers in distant countries may find it difficult, harder, or more expensive to secure what they need for the planting season. Which raises third big question. What's the real chain between a destroyer enforcing a block in the Strait of Hormuz and price of bread, rice, and cooking oil that in a local store months from now? The answer runs through higher fuel costs for farm machinery and transport, costlier and less available fertilizer. It can reduce yields or force farmers to adjust their plans and increase volatility in global grain and food markets as regions embrace the potential supply chain interruptions. Taken together, energy shocks in the Gulf can translate into food price shocks worldwide. Think of this moment as another stress test for the global supply chain. One that sits at a different angle than the pandemic did. In COVID, the problem centered on factories shutting down, ports overwhelmed by containers, and big shifts in consumer demand. Here, the choke points are critical waterways like the Strait of Hormuz, political decisions about which ships are allowed to move, and insurance risk premiums and the willingness to shipping lines to send vessels into contested waters. Companies that rely on Gulf routes for energy, fertilizer, and goods now have to ask, can we route cargo through alternative ports or pipelines, and at what cost? Do we have enough inventory and financial flexibility to absorb delays and price spikes? And how much geopolitical risk are we willing to carry in our core supply lines? For governments, the question is even broader. How to balance sanctions and military pressure with the need to keep essential goods, fuel, and food ingredients flowing. When a navy becomes a valve in the world's energy system, what changes? Well, the US blockade underscores the fact that access to oil isn't just about geology or investments, it's about power. Warships in the strait can, in effect, adjust the flow of energy, and markets respond by repricing risk into every single barrel. Is this an energy crisis or a logistics crisis? In reality, it's a bit of both. The physical barrel is a risk matter, but so are the routes, imports, and insurance markets that determine whether those barrels can even move. Even non-Iranian exports can be disrupted if companies decide that the region is too dangerous. And number three, how does a ship in Hormuz change the price of bread? Higher oil prices and disrupted shipments can raise the cost of fertilizer, fuel, and transport, which after a lag can push up food prices. A naval standoff in a narrow waterway can echo all the way to supermarket shelves thousands of miles away. So, the next time you see a headline about $100 oil or watching footage of ships maneuvering in the Strait of Hormuz, it might be worth remembering. Those images are not just about energy, geopolitics in the abstract. They're about the chain of decisions and disruptions that can touch your commute, your grocery bill, and the stability of economies far in the Gulf. Thank you for listening to Business Insights Daily. I'm your host, Sashank, and I'll see you next time. As always, stay informed, stay ahead. Thank you for listening.